Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hello, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, November 18th, 2020. I have that right? Don't I? November 18th. Okay, everything a little blurry this morning. Let's go with blurry. And, good morning. We're going to make the voice blurry, too. Good morning. Good morning show. All right, ready to roll, I guess, on one other show. May or may not have a democracy here in the United States. You know, the same story that we've been worried about for the last 4 years or so. Developing in new and specific ways. I'm sure we'll discuss that thoroughly when Greg Dworkin gets here. But first of all, I need to justify my morning, the morning line, I guess. Bill has tweeted all the way from Portland, Maine, because that's possible thanks to the miracle of the internet. Kagro in the Morning radio show live now. That's me, Kagro X, behind the microphone, in front of the microphone if you're looking at it from my side of things. And, well, I've already deemed, as he says, this week to be wacky. It is wacky. It feels wacky. Wednesday is always kind of wacky because of the alliteration thing, but it's true in the Trump era, almost always. Anyway, Bill says, all I can say is he damn well better have evidence to back that up with this morning. I do have hard evidence of the wackiness of the week. I don't know that it's any wacky. I can't prove that it's wackier than any other week necessarily, but I can make the case, or I can, of course, lean on other people to make the case. That's what the show is about. I read you the case as stated by others, and then make wacky comments on it, and that makes it even wackier. So it's sort of a built-in thing here in the show. But I see, for instance, well, I don't know. How shall we even put it together? Greg assures me already. He's all right. It's wackier than most other weeks. This is true. Let's see. Mark Murray, for instance, I saw his tweet go by and was shared recently by Josh Marshall and many, many others. Mark Murray putting it this way. This is good. We might as well just jump right into exactly where we are with finishing up with the election and various other things, including oddball, let's say, troop withdrawals ordered by still allegedly President Trump. Not a bad thing in itself. I mean, really, honestly, some of these engagements ought to be drawn down, but you kind of hope that they'd be done with planning and consideration of who's being left behind and of not giving off signals that now would be a great time to, I don't know, attack somewhere, invade somewhere, do something, say from, I don't know, Russia, where you might create an international incident that the current president of the United States might resolve not to pay any attention to whatsoever. That would be a bad situation. Mark Murray, though, beginning with that, says, forget all that. Forget Russia's interference in 2016 or Trump's impeachment for asking Ukraine to dig up dirt on Biden. That went real well, by the way. Arguably the biggest political scandal we've ever seen in this country, I don't know, is unfolding right before our eyes, even if it's failed to gain traction. And he's quoting here from, I don't know, an NBC News article, which, the point is he's got a screen grab from it, and we'll read that. The piece is entitled, Trump's effort to overturn the election results may be inept, but it's still a scandal. And, should not be surprising. Mark Murray, of course, part of the byline on that one because it's our first read that we'll probably find Greg has brought to us as well. But anyway, he puts this piece front and center. Consider the last 24 hours. The two Republican members of Wayne County's canvassing board voted against certifying its election results before reversing course. You no doubt heard about that last night. And Trump praised the action. And that was kind of funny in the way it came down, in that essentially the genius design of many of our canvassing boards and elections boards around the country are to, we'll of course be fair and bipartisan in the design of these things because they control our elections. And we very often find that they are purposefully designed to be split evenly between Democrats and Republicans, giving no respect whatsoever to anybody who might vote third party or be an independent, even though we think that they're the most important people in the world to focus on when it comes to polling time. But they have no representation on these boards. And actually, it's I don't even know how you would do so practically speaking, since most independents are really just other party people in disguise. Anyway, when you deadlock these things, as you may have learned and may remember if you're really old from super committee days, when you have it evenly balanced like that and one party gets in their head the idea that government doesn't work and it ought not to work and we can do anything we want to in order to make it not work, to prove the point that we think it doesn't work, like Republicans often do, they can just stand in the way of everything. And this one county board in Michigan, which I guess includes Detroit, which is one of the big problems with it, but even if it had happened anywhere, really, they just said, we believe the crap we hear on OANN and from the President of the United States. And it used to be the case that you would say, well, if the President of the United States is just repeatedly asserting that it's true, you want to give it some credence, even if you approach it with caution. And they just voted, we're not going to certify our results here. And if that means that the state can't certify its results, well, then that's just the way it is. And that's, in fact, what we're hoping for, and that's how President Trump hopes to exclude the electoral votes that Joe Biden has won from the count, and he wants to get to the Supreme Court. It didn't last long, and there are a lot of reasons for it, and I'm sure Greg will want to discuss some of those. I'll just say this. While Trump was getting ready and finally did tweet his praise for this obstructionism, they had already been forced to change their mind, and they had a second vote, and for whatever reason, this time it was unanimous, and they decided to go ahead and approve it. The opprobrium that they got, both from inside the board itself and outside, sources in Michigan, sources nationwide, sources around the world, excoriating these two, naming them by name, and I'm sure that you all, if you didn't, we can share it with you, saw the video of their Democratic colleague just basically saying, you guys are going to stand out in history as these demonic figures. I don't know whether that really motivated them to change their minds or not, but that was one of the big, crazy items of yesterday, and that's only one of what Mark Murray has put together. Let's let Greg in the door here. He's in the door. Let's allow him to speak, and I'm sure you've got more to add to that, right? Good morning, Greg.
Oh, plenty,
Okay.
And yes, I think it did make an incredibly huge difference in terms of backlash there. But let's just put one thing on the table here. Rudy's plan to screw up individual states and get it to the Supreme Court is actually Plan B.
Okay. Well, that's
Plan A is to get it to the House. That's really where he's angling.
Oh, I see. Okay, yes.
Because he's got a much better chance of winning in the House than he does winning at the Supreme Court.
Yeah, because they can just openly do it in political fashion.
Well, first, they may not get there, and secondly, if they did, they may just say, no, we can't do this. It's too obvious.
That's true, too. Right.
The House
would be happy to do it. Right.
Right, but let's just set this thing up. So let's just do this in sequence.
Okay.
All right. Here's Morning Consult. Majority of voters back Biden's handling of the transition, say Trump isn't helping enough. 60% of voters approve of Biden's transition efforts. 54% say Trump isn't offering enough help. There's a poll from Reuters today. Half of Republicans say Biden won because of a rigged election, but the more important finding, I think, is altogether 73% of those polled agree that Biden won the election, while 5% thought Trump won. So the background for all of this is that as the Republicans try to pull this off, at least some of them try to pull this off, they really do not have public support behind them. And that has a lot to do with why they would buckle under pressure. Brian Stelter points out on Fox and Friends this morning, Brian Kilmeade with a message to Trump about the transition, quote, it's in the country's best interest if he starts coordinating on the virus and starts coordinating on security with the Biden team, end quote. So, the point of all of that is he knows he's lost, and the people around him know he's lost, but he wants to go with Rudy's idea, and Rudy's idea is, why don't you pay me $20,000 a day to do this?
Yes, that's an interesting idea.
And, the fact is that this is an uphill climb, and so therefore the harder it gets, the more I have to charge you. because that's just logic, right?
Yeah,
You know?
I mean, it probably would work with Trump. Not that he's going to
Well,
pay
Jared
him,
and Evita would say, sure. I mean, why not?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Right,
We're
the
dumb.
harder it
You can
is,
talk us into this.
Sure. Yeah.
So
And they
that's
don't
part
care.
of it.
'Cause they
Jake
don't write the
Sherman says,
checks.
playbook this morning is Trump done being president. Donald Trump is out of public view, exacting revenge on his political enemies, including firing the guy who was responsible for election security, which we all knew
It's
was
not that
coming.
exact. It's
Donald
exact.
Trump is out of public view, exacting revenge on his political enemies, ranting about a stolen election, and risking allies on Capitol Hill who are starting to concede that he has lost. McConnell, even Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy actually had a statement about it.
Yeah, he's
It's,
not a
pretty
stable
surprising.
backer, really, but okay.
Anyway, he's hardly made a public appearance since losing the election. He's nothing on his public schedule today. He canceled his Thanksgiving trip to Mar-a-Lago. He fired a DHS official who said the election was safe and secure, the election infection. He has fired the defense secretary, sidelined the CIA director. He and his administration are hardly engaged with Congress on the issues of the day, including new measures to fight the pandemic, and he's not any closer to allowing Biden to transition. So the GOP leader, who is Kevin McCarthy, suggested the election is driving toward Biden. Republican senators were seen fist-bumping Kamala Harris on the Senate floor Tuesday, seemingly congratulating her for winning the election. And on Tuesday night, Trump congratulated the Wayne County, Michigan Board of Canvassers for failing to certify the election results, and hours later, they certified the election results.
Congratulations on failing, and for failing to fail.
Right? So now let's just put in perspective a little bit about what this canvassing stuff is about, because this is the week, this end of this week and beginning of next week,
wacky week, yes.
when the individual states start to certify their findings.
Yes.
Then it goes generally to the governor, who says, yeah, sure, and then it's done, and then there's nothing the Republicans can do about it. So this piece in the Washington Post, while originally describing what happened in Wayne County, has a good timeline for all of this. As the Trump campaign seeks to bolster its position in court, 2 weeks after the election, it's running up against deadlines in several states. Counties in Pennsylvania must certify the results by close of business Monday, leaving less than a week for the campaign to advance lawsuits. In Wisconsin, all 72 counties completed canvasses, and a spokesman for the state elections commission there said Biden led Trump in Wisconsin by 20,608 votes, about 0.6%. That's less than 1%. Wisconsin law allows for Trump to request a recount, but he's got to put the money up by the end of today.
Yes.
And that's $7.9 million.
Right, it's gone up.
Okay.
In
In Arizona's most populous county, Republican-led pressure campaign intensified with calls for a recount of every vote by hand before finalizing the election results, but the GOP-dominated Maricopa County Board of Supervisors intends to move ahead to meet a Monday deadline. And right now, all the evidence points to a completely accurate and fair election. So you have Republicans in Maricopa County in Arizona saying they're not going to go along with this. And this is all part of Mark Murray's big scandal unfolding. In Nevada, where results will not be final until November 24th, Republicans have filed several new suits this week. And just to remind people, it's the 18th. So we're talking about within the week, all these states are going to certify. Trump campaign lawyer Jesse Banal announced the challenge to the state's election, Nevada state's election results on Tuesday, claiming the president won the state of Nevada after you account for the fraud and irregularities.
Yeah, right, sure.
Right, he won the state after you removed Maricopa County, in other words.
Right, plus the magic votes from outer space.
Republican activist and former Senate candidate Sharon Angle revived a suit from before November 3rd and is now seeking to block certification of the statewide results and hold an entirely new election.
Sure,
and finally, Republican state Senate candidate April Becker sued Clark County and its registrar of voters, asking a judge to order a new election because of alleged widespread irregularities. Becker lost her race against Democrat Nicole Cannizzaro by 631 votes. State and local officials in Nevada, as well as outside experts, say there's no evidence of widespread fraud. And Clark County spokesman Dan Coolin said Tuesday the county officials have not yet seen the complaint, but said sounds like the repeating allegations the courts have already rejected. Now, speaking of already rejected, in Pennsylvania yesterday, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision reversed a lower court, the one time out of like 25 cases that the Republicans won.
Right.
The Pennsylvania Supreme Court reversed a lower court's ruling that Philadelphia had violated state law by not giving Republican poll watchers sufficient access to observe the vote count.
Yes.
In the majority opinion, the state justices ruled that the Philadelphia Canvassing Board broke no laws and setting up boundaries for observers in a county space. In other words, you have to be 6 feet apart. And the lower court said, no, that's no good. You got to be closer. And that was the only thing that they won. And this court said, no, actually, that's fine. And it's not going to change the ballots anyway. And even the Supreme Court's 2 dissenters on Tuesday, who argued Philadelphia had not followed state law, said the finding shouldn't be invalidating all the votes counted in the facility. It's misguided to say otherwise, says the dissent. So they keep losing in court over and over and over. Mark Elias, by the way, who runs a lot of these cases, is a hero.
Right.
For the Democrats. And they're not getting anywhere. And that's the background behind this whole Wayne County thing. So they're running up against deadlines. They're failing everywhere. They're not getting it done. The court cases aren't working. Rudy's plan is stupid, and many of the Republicans don't want to have anything to do with it, says Robert Costa, reporting in the Washington Post separately on this. And that's when it comes up that the Wayne County Canvass Board looks at the situation yesterday and says, you know what? The 2 Republicans here are racist. One guy's a Q guy.
Yes,
I have a lot of that stuff from his Facebook page and the pundit roundup. This was so egregious. I actually had a separate elections shenanigans section at the very end here.
Very nice.
I
like the organization.
Del Quinton Wilbur, reporter, did a cruise through Wayne County Canvassing Board member William Hartman's public Facebook post. He's a Republican, so not a surprise he's a big Trump supporter, but here's a couple of things. He's got Obama about stealing things, Obama Muslims and NASA. He has a picture saying, I'm only interested in learning how to fly, not land. He's got all sorts of nasty things about people of color on his Facebook page. And so he's one of the people who said, well, I'm not sure I really have enough information here. I tell you what, why don't we certify all of the different white cities in Wayne County, but just not Detroit, who happens to have black voters.
Yes.
It's just a coincidence.
Right.
And even though the discrepancies that we're seeing here, which is basically the number of people at the polls counted by the machines versus the number of votes when you add up the votes, is a discrepancy. It's an imbalance, they call it. That happens all the time, and that's why you do the canvass, to straighten that stuff out. So that's not at all untoward. And there were bigger problems with imbalancing in white cities than black cities, but they decided only to pick out the black city and say that's the one with the problem. And so they tried to do that, but State Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey, who's a Republican and a right-wing nut job in his own, defense, says Joe Biden is president-elect and the Republican majority state legislature will not award the state's electoral votes to Trump. Not going to happen. That's a quote from yesterday. So
that's the
he
thing
was
to
part
say.
of the pushback against the canvassing board. Obviously, the locals were. And in the story that covers it, it was quite interesting because part of the opprobrium that they got were from their neighbors.
Oh.
Okay? In other words, people who are at the polls counting the votes, spending the 16 hours, are their neighbors.
That is true.
And they're the ones that said, you are telling us that we committed fraud. We, your neighbors, are saying, what the hell are you talking about? We're Republicans. We're Democrats. We're impartial here. We're simply counting the votes. You know who we are. We have names. And you're telling us. I mean, that's how the whole thing went for 2 hours, 3 hours. And that's part of the pressure that they were under. It's one thing to be a Nazi about, faceless people in Washington that nobody knows. And it's quite another to try to pull that crap in front of somebody who literally lives next door to you.
Yeah.
That's what they tried to do, and it didn't work. You know the poll workers. These are for years and years, the over 65s, who get up at 5 a.m. and are in their, sneakers, and they work 16-hour days, and they count up, they check you in. You know who these people are because everybody votes in their neighborhood.
Right.
And, these are the people that they were attacking. It didn't work for that reason. Yeah. Plus, Mike Shirkey and the national response. But, this is a local thing. This is one of those all politics is local. You can't tell your neighbors that they're deliberately screwing up and have the neighbors say in your face, buddy, I live next door to you. You voted with me for years. Our kids went to church. And you're calling me a fraudster? Come on. Come on, man. That's malarkey. And so, it didn't go. It did not fly.
Yeah. Well,
so they had to back off, and 2 hours later, after Trump tweeted how wonderful they're doing, they said, no, we're going to certify it. And in fact, the Costa story in the Washington Post said, talking to Republican election officials and election lawyers in Wayne County, said it was pretty obvious that they got themselves in a pickle that they didn't know how to get out of, and they were looking for a way out. So the way out was to come up with a compromise that one of the Democrats suggested that, look, you certify the election, and we promise to do an audit.
Yes.
And they said, okay, there's my lifeline. There's my ramp, exit ramp. I'll take it.
Yeah. That was the well-engineered exit. That's true. Yeah, I don't know.
But that's what happened, So it's like they thought this was a good idea because somebody from higher up suggested they do it, and of course they were primed. They didn't need a lot of persuading.
Right.
But once it was in their face publicly, and they had to actually do this publicly, maybe it's not such a good idea.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't want the entire country visiting my house tonight.
Right. They were happy to do it the first time,
Protesting.
and then then when they realized everybody sees it. They thought, no one really looking at the Wayne County Board of Canvassers here. We can do this thing. And then we're just anonymous bureaucrats somewhere along the line that made some decision. It'll be reviewed elsewhere, and the spotlight will be on other people. But no.
Right. So let's go over what would have happened, because I think this is also important and part of the story. So as you pointed out, it was a deliberately partisan board. That is to say, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and you need 3 out of 4 to agree to certify. That's how it was set up. Having 5 with a nonpartisan might be a better idea, but this is the way they did it. And according to Bridge, Michigan, their reporter, Jonathan
Smith Jones.
No. Jonathan Osterhaus has been following. Jonathan Osting has been following this, and he's really good, and he really lays it all out. A deadlock would have punted Wayne County election results to the State Board of Canvassers, which would have had 10 days to complete the review. Already Republican member Norm Schinkel, whose wife served as a GOP poll challenger in Detroit, has told Bridge, Michigan he makes no predictions on his vote. And for a few hours, the prospect of state canvassers giving Michigan to Trump bolstered his supporters after the campaign had lost a series of legal challenges, which we just went over. If the state board follows suit, the Republican state legislature will select the electors. Huge win for Donald Trump, tweeted his legal advisor, Jenna Ellis, who, of course, is wrong about everything, so that may be confident that this wasn't going to happen. The president, that's like, Larry Kudlow making a prediction. Oh, good, the opposite will happen. The president joined in tweeting, flip Michigan back to Trump and having courage is a beautiful thing. The USA stands proud. So what happens is basically it then goes to the state, and then the state, if they can't resolve it, would go to the Michigan State Supreme Court for an order to do it. And the problem is that the state Supreme Court is 4-3 Republican and fairly partisan.
Yes.
So the likelihood is that this wasn't going to work, but the details are that in theory it could have. And that's why it gave everybody pause, and that's why Mark Murray is saying it's a scandal.
Yes.
Okay, do not try this at home, but I'll be right back. I have to get something at the door here, and I'll be back in 2 minutes.
Well, you can try it at home. In fact, this would be a fantastic time for all of you to try it at home. If there's anybody at your door or anybody you anticipate at your door, now's the time to open it with Greg busy. But, yeah, this was quite a scene yesterday, and I thought, the most interesting part of it to me was that just as Trump was tweeting out his congratulations, the board was reversing itself. And I think it actually came the other way around. I think the board actually reversed itself and did so just before Trump got around to tweeting his congratulations. So a little bit of a lack of coordination on the ground information, getting on the ground information to the president in time. But I guess he probably didn't anticipate such a quick turnaround. But it was very interesting to watch the dynamics of it. Only thing that could have happened better for that would for rather than tweeting his congratulations, if he had been delivering his congratulations on Sean Hannity's show or something. Well, the breaking news came through that the decision actually all fell apart and was reversed. That would have been interesting to watch, but I guess
I would have loved to watch that, but I didn't.
Yeah,
this piece from Bridge, Michigan goes on to say the idea went nowhere, but drew heaps of criticism. The Republican canvassers, Palmer and Hartman, had caused controversy before the canvass vote by visiting the TCF Center in Detroit to view the counting of absentee ballots, a role that fellow board member Kinloch, one of the Democrats, had questioned and raised a conflict of interest. And Palmer, the head of the board, a Republican female, asserted that she was going as an observer, not as a party challenger. And likewise, the wife of Schinkel, the state canvassing board member, was also at TCF as a Republican poll challenger. There's no reason under the sun for us not to certify this election, said the Democrat. A precinct out of balance is based on human error. You need to wrap your head around the fact that individuals come to do their job for one day. It's not even realistic for anybody to stand here and try to imply votes were cast improperly. And the balancing issue, the number of people who voted at the poll versus the number of votes that tally up, the balancing issue is important because Michigan is one of few states that forbid recounts in precincts whose books are out of balance. So it's part and parcel of how they do it to do this balancing thing. And that's the genesis of Michigan being challenged, which that kind of challenge wouldn't necessarily work in Arizona or Georgia.
Okay. Yeah, one of their weird idiosyncrasies. You see them exploited all the
so
time.
You look at this and you say, well, oh my gosh, look what's happening in Michigan. How do we know that won't happen in all the other states? Because all the other states don't have that particular rule.
That's true. They have other crazy rules.
They have other rules. I mean, the concept is there.
It's fun. You'll learn all the rules from all the states.
Yeah, well, it's one of the things that talking with you over the years, even before we did the show, it taught me is that process is important and who has the gavel matters and the rules matter and there are rules to follow. And yes, you can break them and yes, you can change them, but you at least have to know what they are before you even start.
Yeah, well, it's important, and I will say this, so that we can give high marks to the Trump team if they need this in order to shut up and go away. Good for you for knowing the local rules, and I guess bad for us that you know how to exploit them. But at least they knew that was the case.
That they can be exploited is the big story,
yes.
And that's why Mark Murray said scandal.
Yeah, well, he's right about that. And, we'll touch on this a little bit more. There are a few other points to make on the other side of our 2-minute break, and then the rest of the world's worth of news. Stay tuned. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. Greg Dworkin's still with us, rounding up the craziness from last night. I did want to add in here at some point, just to give you an idea of what kind of people were involved in the earlier portion of these proceedings, the people who were the observers, or rather the challengers who were there. Just quick reminder, Ryan Riley, I noticed, had tweeted out a couple of things this morning from HuffPost. Just saying, a reminder, a lot of the complaints from Detroit came originally from a bunch of conservatives who were, as he notes parenthetically, mostly white people from the suburbs, who got voter fraud brainworms on Facebook and then got about 10 minutes worth of training from the campaign and didn't know anything about how any of this stuff worked. So they'd show up thinking, for instance, as they did in Philadelphia, this distance that they put between us and the ballot counters is improper because I'm supposed to be here. I get to look at the ballots and examine them, like the famous picture of the guy examining the hanging chads down in Florida in 2000. I get to handle them, look over them, and right.
I even brought my own magnifying glass.
Yeah, and it's not like that.
It's
you get to
glass.
observe
says,
the
right,
counting.
It's a branded thing.
Yeah.
It says Trump on the handle, and Sean Hannity sold it to him.
Right. I mean, they
it's made out of gold. They paid
$5,000
for it
to be amateur detectives, and there were some people who came there with the plans. I'm just going to challenge every ballot and let them find a way to convince me to let this ballot go by. And that's not the role that is that's allowed for them. The counters are doing the counting, and they get to watch to make sure that people don't feed giant swaths of ballots into shredders or pull out ballots and start filling them out and then counting them. It's not you get to examine every ballot. They thought that was the case. And so they started making more and more Facebook videos of how the vote's being stolen because I don't get to handle these ballots. And, they never trained them right. And, it's standard training, but it usually works because they're typically non-crazy people that show up for this training. So anyway, he's got a couple other very interesting things. I'll share that tweet thread with you in the roundup. Speaking of roundup, there's more.
So this is from the Detroit Free Press, again, to give you an idea of what was going to happen in Michigan. Now that the county's Board of Canvassers has certified the election results, and they have, the Board of State Canvassers is tasked with certifying the statewide results. And under Michigan election law, the state board must certify the results by November 23rd.
Okay, that's soon.
Okay, well, today's the 18th, so they got to do it by Monday. Yeah. Recount petitions for the presidential, Senate, U.S. House, and State House seats must be filed with the Secretary of State within 48 hours after the board has certified the statewide results. That's Wednesday of next week. So a change to Michigan's recount process made after the 2016 presidential election requires candidates to prove they have a reasonable chance to win in order to initiate a recount. Biden won Michigan by a wide margin, more than 146,000 votes. So legal experts said they expect the State Board of Canvassers will meet the deadline for certifying the results, despite pending lawsuits seeking to delay the process. Mm-hmm. So there's some states like Wisconsin, which are close enough that you can make a case you should do a recount, and there's states like Michigan where basically you can't.
Yes.
By the way, I don't know if you saw it, but Biden wound up winning Pennsylvania by like 70,000 votes.
I knew it was creeping up every day. I was going to ask about when you mentioned
it was basically double what Trump won by in 2016.
Right. So, no problems
but
with
back
the first
to Michigan.
time.
So then after the State Board of Canvassers certifies the statewide results, then Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, otherwise known as Big Gretch, will certify the slate of electors nominated by the Michigan Democratic Party to cast the state's electoral college votes for President-elect Joe Biden.
Right. And
then after December 8th, it's done, and there's nothing anybody can do about it.
Right. Well, we hope so. Anything can happen. Of course, you could blow up the whole thing, and maybe even literally. But normally everything proceeds from that point, and there's very little that you can do to stop it, although you can make a ruckus later on. It usually gets smoothed over pretty quickly. I was going to say it's weird that it ends up being, Wayne County in Michigan, and you mentioned Wisconsin, and there's the Waukesha, and is it only the W counties that create problems this way? I'm trying to think of other.
No, because there's Fulton County in Atlanta area.
Did they cause a problem? I thought they.
Cobb County.
All right. Well, I mean, there are other counties.
DeKalb, there's others.
Are these guys putting up this kind of a fight?
This is from the Robert Costa piece in the Washington Post. Among those who spoke during the public comment period was Jennifer Redmond, the deputy chair of elections from Wayne County. She choked up as she addressed the board about the decision not to certify the election results. Redmond recounted how she and her staff have worked 16 hours a day to certify the results for the counties involving more than 1,100 precincts where 878,000 ballots were cast to meet a nearly impossible 2-week deadline. We've been here tirelessly, she said, calling it a slap in the face for the board members not to certify the results, particularly after the staff worked through a pandemic in which cases are spiking across the state. Pandemic, of course, being the other big story today. The staff, largely made up of middle-aged and 20-something black men and women, looked on in silence with their arms crossed as they watched the unprecedented move not to approve the results. After the vote, there was an overwhelming response at the meeting and beyond. The two Republicans on the panel found themselves under verbal assault, accused of racism, violating their public obligations, attempting to hijack what even the GOP leaders in Lansing said were the clear results of the election, and the excoriation of the Republican members came from people at the meeting, but also from the governor, the Michigan House Minority Leader, and election experts around the country. Yeah. So they were up against it.
Well, good.
I believe, as things went on, that the Republicans were looking for a way out, said an experienced Michigan election lawyer who spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe private discussions. Then a Democratic member of the board proposed a compromise, 2020 vote be certified, and an audit of the Detroit vote to follow. Everybody was happy with that. They got out of that mess that they were in, and that brings us to today.
Okay.
By the way, there's other good election news that came the other day. I don't know if you heard it.
I don't know.
But Alaska became the second state to approve ranked choice voting for statewide ballot measures.
I didn't hear that.
It passed by 1%.
Excellent. Therefore, a walrus has won.
But it will take 3 weeks to find out.
Well, that's true. Isn't that interesting? That's going to add some, one of the, I guess, unintended consequences. I assume it takes longer to tabulate the results but I guess maybe not that much longer if you have a nice computer or something, but that'll only throw a wrench into works later on. But okay, so we have Maine and
now we have Alaska.
Alaska, our northernmost states,
from Alaska to Maine.
Good. I guess does it work its way south from there? You have to have a W county that makes trouble in order to pass it?
Kind of slow to take things up. They're still working on the 1860s.
Well, yeah, that's true. Ranked choice voting. Right down there, they'll be like, okay, white people first.
Yeah, something about
what?
scalawags, something. So carpetbaggers, something.
Okay. So when would that take? I guess next election is.
Next
statewide
election.
Right away? Well, that'll be interesting. And what a state to do it in, too. And I guess, or maybe it's probably not even coincidence that it would happen in Maine and Alaska, where you tend to get robust independent candidacies, or at least robust independent and third-party membership in those those angry
Alaska,
states.
we're talking about the Alaska Independence Party.
Yeah, well, right. You remember them, and but even this time around, what wasn't in the Senate race was not strictly speaking a Democratic candidate, wasn't it?
No, he was an independent.
Yeah.
Who was going to be a Democratic caucuser.
Yeah. So
but things are complicated.
It makes sense that they would move to it first because they have legitimate-ish, I guess, challengers from third parties or outside the party system entirely who, make credible cases for themselves as candidates. And people say, I'd like to be able to pull the lever here. I'm just afraid of what the outcome is going to be. I'm going to get the opposite of what I wanted by voting for somebody who I think has integrity. I'm going to get someone who has none. What do I do? And you're going to opt for that ranked choice voting that's going to make it safe for you to do what you think is the right thing and still get good results.
That helped us in Maine with House seats the last election. It didn't help with Susan Collins. There's a whole big story in the New York Times about how people just got really tired of outside people coming in and dumping money on Susan Collins, and she's got her own brand, and so she wound up winning. So it's not like a panacea, but it's better for democracy, and that's you can't guarantee elections. We're not Republicans. What we want is it to be fair, and this is a fairer way of doing it, so it's a good thing.
Yeah, unfortunate result, but I mean, if that's what you want, then okay, I can't fight about it as long as you count right.
But also a cautionary tale about don't rush to Georgia if they don't want you. Talk to them first.
Well, don't rush anywhere. I think we learned that with orange hats in Iowa.
I was going to say that. I mean, we just learn. You have to relearn this lesson over and over and over. Go with how the locals want to do their campaigns.
Yes.
Don't decide from the outset. We know better than you locals how to do this. We'll just come in and do it for you. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, well, as a solution, it's not a good one. We can't always assume that they are going to do things correctly and fairly.
People, it doesn't always work, but it's a general rule, even though there's going to be exceptions. Now, another state we have to cover in terms of election shenanigans is Georgia.
What have
story
they done?
Today in ProPublica. Ace election reporter Jessica Huseman reporting Georgia's Secretary of State, now the target of Trump attacks, rebuffed a campaign job offer and hostile GOP requests for a Trump endorsement ahead of the election, citing responsibilities. They were putting pressure on him for about 10 months, including Lindsey Graham calling him, saying, why don't you invalidate the vote so we win?
Yeah, that was after. But this was before
the stuff, according to this story, started 10 months before the election. Yeah. And Ravensburger all along has said, no, that's not my job. My job is to be fair. You don't have to like it. And so whether you're talking about Krebs, who was fired by Trump from DHS for trying to ensure fair elections, or this guy, Ravensburger, there are Republicans that do their job the way they see it fairly.
There are that.
They're so few and far between, you now know their names.
Right. Speaking of the names, right, as I understand it from this story, the job offer was they asked Raffensperger, though he was Secretary of State and in control of the votes and vote counting, would you like to be Trump campaign chair for Georgia? And he said, well, that would be unseemly. No.
Brian Kemp would have said yes.
Not only that.
And he's just the governor.
Catherine Harris famously did say yes. You all remember her. She was the Secretary of State of Florida and in charge of the count and the certification of the vote down there, and she absolutely was the George W. Bush Florida state campaign chair, and everybody thought it was outrageous then, but they're still doing it. So,
well,
but not him anyway. So that's good. That's well-deserved kudos, I suppose, for him.
Right. So
we'll say yes to that.
That's pretty much most of the shenanigans that at least we know about yesterday, and the major big piece here is, on the one hand, it's not working. They're a bunch of incompetent clowns, and on the other hand, it's real. I mean, the lawsuits are just like laugh at them and bring popcorn. But however futile and clownish, the actual attempt to change the vote in Michigan is scary.
Yes. And
there
you
was
should be
an actual plan to try to thwart the will of the voters and basically say, we're not even saying 3/5. We're saying, like, black people's votes don't count.
Yeah, although it did. I saw Charles Gaba noted that it worked out that way, apparently. The votes, when they finally said, well, we'll certify everything except Detroit, that happened. Just, coincidentally happened to be about 3/5 of the votes in Wayne County that they were willing to certify.
How interesting.
Yes, these things happen from time to time.
So these things happen. Now, the really big story that trumps all of that is the pandemic. And yes, it's going on. And again, I probably say this every time I'm on for a couple of weeks now. The number of cases is going up. 2 weeks later, 12 days later, the hospitalizations go up. And approximately 2 to 3 weeks after that, the deaths go up.
Yes.
So we're in a bad place. It's going to get worse. But there is good news, and there's a bunch of good news that's come out. Pfizer, for example, this morning by press release says, no, they can match Moderna's 94% with a 95% efficacy in preventing serious disease.
Right.
There was an article in the New York Times suggesting that studies now say that immunity may be longer lasting than thought, up to a year, maybe even longer, maybe even better with a vaccine. And there was an emergency use authorization for a home testing kit for COVID. And the way this works is basically you swab yourself and then stick it in a device that or somehow or other measures it within 30 minutes and tells you whether or not you're positive. So you don't have to leave your home.
Well, that's good. And
the good news is that if this is mass produced, it'll help everybody check to see what's going on. The bad news is you're not required to report your results to anybody. So the public health people have no clue as to what's going on.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, that's a neat twist. Okay. I was thinking, so is that not yet available?
They just authorized it last night, so it's not yet available this morning.
I don't have it right now. Anyway.
It's going to have the same distribution network as the PlayStation 5. They've announced it's available, but when you go to buy one, you can't get one.
It. Okay, well, good. I got to figure out how we're going to handle these things. It's not going to happen in time for me to bring our college student home, but that's happening Friday. By the way, and
today's Wednesday, so probably not. But by the time they have to go back, if they go back, then yes.
Then you can test and voluntarily tell the college. All right.
So or when you tell your college kid, based on the pandemic, you really can't go visit any of your friends, and you have to be in quarantine after you get home for 14 days, and they get really upset about it. Then you get testing that's available before that 14-day period is over, and maybe you can play with it a little bit.
Yeah, all right. Well, we can...
I'm going against advice, but at least I have this test.
Yeah.
I bought 9 of them because, you're going out, every 5 hours.
Wow. Okay. I don't know. We'll have to see what happens when he gets back. I was kind of hoping for that, and we're still struggling with exactly what to do as we drive. I guess we drive back in mass.
Well, you put them upstairs, and you stay downstairs, and you communicate by Zoom for 2 weeks.
Right. That's normal. So I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I was going to say, if it's my household, so what else is new?
Right. See, this is, I told you should just be a more comfortable
Is he up?
driver.
I don't know. He just texted me. I guess so.
Okay, right. Yeah. Oh, look, he's texting a breakfast order. It's 2:00. It's about time. Exactly. All right.
So we'll have to figure out how that goes. But all of that together is good news. I mean, the vaccine availability, the length of the immunity that lasts afterwards,
now,
and the ability of home tests to be ramped up. At least in theory, it's possible now that they have a UA. So that's all good news to counter the terrible news about how bad things are going to get over the next month or so.
Where is the monoclonal culture super cure? How come we don't have that
Well, it's not exactly available to everybody.
yet? What's up with that?
Even though Trump promised it would be by the time he left the hospital.
I am concerned
But,
about this.
he lies a lot. I don't know if you noticed this about Trump.
I hadn't. I'll make a note.
Oh,
35,000 people have died waiting for the instant cure that he said. I'm signing this order immediately. But, of course, there's no such order, and it doesn't matter. Nobody signs those things. But anyway, all right, just keeping tabs on that. The vaccine sounds like a better thing. I'm still waiting on that nasal spray. And the rapid testing will be helpful, too. By the way, I think we've figured out how this happens, that they come to this conclusion. But how do you arrive at the conclusion that you might get and keep immunity to COVID-19 for up to, for a year or more if we haven't had the disease for a year yet?
That's a good question.
Oh.
I don't know. I have to go back and look at the story.
I was wondering about that. I think the thing I gleaned from reading and hearing about it was, I guess they're extrapolating maybe from the SARS experience, but and I guess they're both coronavirus. Is that right?
Yeah, different kinds.
Right.
This is actually SARS 2. Mm-hmm. Technically.
Right. So I mean, did they name it that probably for a good reason, as opposed to naming it something else? So there must be some similarity, but I don't know.
So they're just taking blood work from patients who actually had it and looking for things like antibodies and T-cell response. So 8 months after infection, most people who have recovered still have enough immune cells to fend off the virus and prevent illness, say the studies.
Okay. It's just not universally true, as nothing ever is. Some people
in other words, if it's 8 months after infection and you can still show that you have immune cells and antibodies, and that the decline in those things is slow, then you can extrapolate and say, well, if it's only gone down this much after 8 months, maybe it'll, at the same rate, last a year or more.
Yes. So
that's why, even
people
though it hasn't been there for a year, you could still say, well, a year or more.
Okay. Right. So, all right. I mean, that's probably a pretty good guess. There's no real reason to just pull a number out of thin air. And the number of reinfections has been very low in terms of the reporting on it. So
right, it happens, but it's relatively rare.
Okay, so that's all right. And then we have to find out whether or not getting that rapid super treatment with that Trump
and then
got
it adds the SARS thing that you've said, and the research squares. This is from the New York Times, and the research squares with another recent finding that survivors of SARS caused by another coronavirus still carry important immune cells 17 years after recovering.
17 years.
Yeah. The findings are consistent with
nice.
encouraging evidence emerging for other labs. Certain memory cells were producing following infection with the coronavirus persist for at least 3 months in the body. And people who have recovered from COVID-19 have powerful and protective killer immune cells, even when antibodies aren't detectable. In other words, what happens is that you have memory cells that can be ramped up and start producing antibody even when the antibody goes away. So just testing for antibody alone doesn't tell you whether or not you're immune.
Oh, well, that's a bit of a downer, I guess.
No, it's an upper, because it turns out if your antibodies are gone, your body still can produce them in a hurry.
I guess so. If
exposed to the new virus. So you can't use a test to tell you whether you're immune.
That's what I mean.
But your response says you probably still are.
Yeah. Okay, well, that would be good. I say it was a bit of a downer because we've been running around testing people for antibodies, and now we find out
not that much. I mean, we're still trying to work on testing for the actual virus. We haven't even gotten to the large-scale antibody test yet.
Wow. Yes, true. Okay, well, now you don't have to, I guess. That's
so the headline in the Times, I think, covers it. Immunity to the coronavirus may last years, new data hints at.
All right.
Right? None of this is guaranteed.
All right. But it is.
But so far, so good.
And at 96% guaranteed.
Right.
Better than the other
it's all encouraging. It's all good.
Yeah, that is good. And next up, they have to work on, I guess tomorrow, Pfizer will tell us it's okay to pack the vaccine in your lunchbox and take it with you to work. It doesn't need to be negative 90 degrees because the other guys doesn't. I don't know. I'm not certain where they came up with that. I thought 90% effective was a pretty good claim the other day.
Well, 92, we have 94. Well, we have 95. Oh, yeah? I'm reminded of that Bugs Bunny Yosemite Sam with the 6-gun, 7-gun, 8-gun, 9-gun,
Oh, see, I go to the 6-minute abs joke instead, but okay.
Yeah, well, I'm old.
Right. We understand this. I'm not, and I am too. This is half the audience saying, "Oh, you mean the thing on Turner Classic Movies? Something about Mary?"
Yeah, something about
that's
that,
the
right?
one.
Law professor Lessig says conservatives are pushing an unconstitutional theory to keep
What?
Trump in office. State legislatures do not have the power to veto the people's choice in an election.
Who says this? Who
Lawrence
says
Lessig.
it? Oh, well.
And he says it in USA Today, so it must be true.
And you can buy it at McDonald's.
Right, there you go. And there's your story.
Right.
Trump fans are
I will
peddling the
take it.
theory about legislatures can override election results,
Yeah.
but the framers rejected the idea, and so did the Supreme Court, says Lawrence Lessig. That's important because that's Rudy's whole theory of the case. And remember,
Yes.
everything Rudy does is wrong.
Yeah, he had a terrible day in court yesterday.
Yeah.
His first time back in many, many years.
Yeah.
In federal
So-
court. Yeah, that's true. All right, well, we'll take a look at what he has to say. Because generally speaking, this is true. It's just that we're kind of in an extraordinary moment where people aren't paying attention to law or USA Today.
Right. One last thing I should mention. I don't have this at my fingertips, but if I'm remembering correctly, we have an election for House Speaker coming up.
Yes, well, yes. We'll say yes, and then I'll say no later. But there will be no election per se. She will be renominated by
Yes.
acclamation in the House Democratic Caucus.
Yeah,
But yeah.
that's going to happen, right? And so there isn't even going to be. That was the point I was trying to make. Even the last time around,
Yes.
there was like a challenge to her.
Yeah.
I don't think that's happening this time.
It's not, and it's got some people furious. But yeah, we began discussing that yesterday. The first of the scheduled elections for leadership positions, they're sort of starting at the bottom and going up, begin today. And so today and tomorrow, those positions for which they'll need to do voting will take place in Zoom meetings among, I don't know if it's necessarily Zoom, but you get the idea. Remote meetings of the Democratic caucus today and tomorrow.
Right.
In fact,
So
probably right now.
this will probably be her last term.
Okay.
And she's been great, but her time is just about up. And she's going to have a rough go of it for the next couple of years, given the state of the country. But there's going to be a lot of positives there that people just don't see yet.
True.
For example, I'll give you
yes,
one.
all right,
People
I'll
aren't
let you
even
do that.
talking about this, but they should. What if the polls don't tell you? No. What if it turns out that because of the vaccine and the home test for COVID, that by the second half of 2021, there's an enormous economic recovery?
Yeah, that would be good.
Who would it benefit? Trump?
Me. Yeah,
I don't
Trump,
think so.
sure.
Republicans?
No, he's gone.
I doubt it.
Yeah.
So all
Joe
your
Biden?
speculation about what always happens with midterm elections, I'm just telling you now, is probably wrong.
That's an interesting point. I mean, that's the historical pattern, true, but we've broken free of that, I think, by
We
now.
have, between the connection of the economy with how people vote, economic anxiety, it ain't.
Right.
The pandemic disrupting everything, the ability to actually put some good news on the table, which nobody foresees. I'm just saying, when you start gaming out already what's going to happen 2 years from now, when this election isn't even over yet, don't.
That's true. Probably time. There's plenty of time to wait, and
Plenty of
probably
time to
wise
wait.
to do
Don't rush.
then you won't
Unless you
have
want
a
to talk
hot
about
take.
who's going to Iowa for dinners or New Hampshire for conferences and stuff like that. You can do that, but don't get carried away about predicting
factual.
what's going to happen in the House. You don't know yet.
No, probably not. And I was just going to say that. All right. Well, with a narrow. Well, it's not even that narrow, but a narrower majority in the House. Vote counting and vote corralling and marshalling is a very important skill, and she does have that. She's rarely wrong about that.
Really good at it.
Yeah. But yeah, we should discuss that a little bit, and maybe we'll go back over. I talked a little bit about who is standing for election in contested elections yesterday, and reminding everybody how to predict how those things will come out. And that will answer your question, if you have it at home, about why there were no challenges to Nancy Pelosi. One answer is they always have these elections pretty quickly, and you don't have a whole lot of time to assess the situation and arrange a candidacy, and that's by design. They don't really want that to happen at the highest levels very often. And two, money. She's she's a machine.
Yeah, she's got it, and a lot of other people don't. Let me give you two factoids from Dave Wasserman, redistrict, before I go.
All right.
1, the House count stands at 221 Democrat, 209 Republican, and there are 5 outstanding races with his informal ratings. California 21, likely R. California 25, lean R. Iowa 2, lean R with a recount. New Jersey 7, likely D. And New York 22, toss-up.
Okay.
So in the best scenario, Republicans pick up 3, Democrats 2. So that would give 223 Democrats and 212 Republicans. So tight, but, still a Republican minority. And then the second factoid, also from Dave Wasserman, is Monroe County, Rochester, New York, just reported its absentees. Biden, 77,533. Trump, 22,295. Biden's national popular vote just climbed to 5.81 million. And he'll probably get to 6 million with little trouble.
Okay. Well, those votes have to already be counted.
So he'll win by at least 4%.
Don't try to go out there and vote now. Yeah.
So it wasn't as close as 2016.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll make note of that and start to learn those numbers.
We still have to wait on California, but we'll see.
Oh, yeah. Well, we always have to wait on them. We're used to that by now. Okay. Well, thanks, Greg.
Right.
Yeah, that kind of wraps it up, I guess, at least in terms of the hour. And
that's my job.
Thursday.
Finish the hour so you can decide in the 2 minutes you have what you're going to do in the second hour.
Right. Yeah, I have some idea. Give me some other ones. That'd be helpful.
I'll come back tomorrow.
Okay, how about that? Yeah, even better than why not, instead of doing the second hour now, why don't you do the first hour tomorrow? And I'll spread the wealth. It's a good idea.
That sounds good.
Very good. Thanks very much. We'll see you then tomorrow, and we'll explain the rest of the day in about 1 minute after we take this break. We'll figure it all out. Thanks again, Greg. Good nuggets as always. And, I don't know, blah, 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 really, for another 5 seconds, essentially. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see if I can find when Greg was mentioning on the way out the door about what Wasserman was saying and redistrict and discussing the numbers. Let's see. I'm pretty sure I saw him throw out this other nugget the other day. Yeah, that's right. Here's from Monday. Saying I thought this was just sort of interesting. It's been almost 2 weeks since Election Day, and Democrats still haven't won a single one of the 27 House races in Cook Political Report's toss-up column. I thought that was kind of an interesting bit of information. I don't know whether it's held true or whether, let's see, at the time, on Monday, he said 4 remain too close to call. California 21st, California 25th district, Iowa's 2nd district, New York 2nd, and New York's 22nd district. There's a thread attached to it. I was just sort of curious. Oh, and then of course he comes back to say, hey, that's 5, not 4. So his counting is not all that good either. The math is a little wacky. But then he went on to say Republicans have also won 5 of the 18 races that Cook Political rated as lean D. That is to say 28% of them, and 2 of the 18 races rated as likely D. So that is kind of interesting, and another signal that the polling at the district level was highly suspect at best. He goes on then to say in the blue wave, Dems won 2 of the 29 races rated as lean R, and 2 of the 29 races rated as likely R. So that's kind of interesting all by itself. Of course, I took the opportunity to point out, well, that does seem rather unlikely that Democrats didn't win a single one of the 27 toss-ups. Aha, evidence of voter fraud. It's all rigged, you see, but it was rigged one way at the presidential level and rigged another way at the congressional level somehow, according to the claims by Republicans who insist that the whole thing was fraudulent and that Democrats, for some reason, didn't give themselves the benefit of that fraud in the congressional races, and all the congressional races that went Republican are fine and dandy. I just thought that was kind of an interesting nugget, though. We'll include it in the roundup so that everybody can see it. What else is in this thread? Yeah. Well, a lot of other interesting comments that went along with it. Not particularly good news for Democratic campaign operatives at the congressional level, or for that matter, for the pollsters at the congressional level, or really, honestly, it should be bad news for the subscription department at Cook Political Report, too. They'll have that to reckon with, and 2 years to do it. Whereas we have 1 hour to reckon with all the other stories that I wanted to bring to your attention. Let's see. So what else did I put aside? Yes, I was somewhat interested in the ProPublica report, which I grabbed from a different source, but it's the same report on the Republican activity in Georgia attempting to recruit Georgia Secretary of State Raffensperger to their side. And I thought, well, like I said, with Greg, it was a good reminder that they actually did work with Katherine Harris in Florida in 2000, and that probably, if you're old enough that it's an adult memory for you, that's a searing one. And no, that practice still continues in other states. I don't know what it was like this time around in Florida. They happened to pick a guy for Secretary of State in Georgia who was not willing to play that game, and that's interesting and has ramifications all by itself. But I think it's still the case in other states around the country even now. Anyway, I thought this story was interesting. Maybe we can share the bulk of it just as they wrote it. And here we're talking about Jessica Huseman and Mike Spies or Spies. I don't know. I think we've had his name called out before, and we had the same problem. Apologies to the good folks at ProPublica for not learning it in the meantime, but there's so much happening. Long before Republican senators began publicly denouncing how Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger handled the voting there, and we're really talking about Lindsey Graham here, but I guess there's more. He withstood pressure from the campaign of Donald Trump to endorse the president for re-election. Raffensperger, a Republican, declined an offer in January to serve as at least honorary co-chair of the Trump campaign in Georgia, according to emails reviewed by ProPublica. He later rejected GOP requests to support Trump publicly, he and his staff said in interviews. And by the way, yes, I think now that at the mention of his staff, I'll say there's another story that I have saved here in pocket, detailing the interactions between Raffensperger and Lindsey Graham, who appears to have been caught, for all the world like he's been caught in lies about his contacts. Of course, Graham denying that he, that this was the nature of the conversation that he had with Raffensperger. But by yesterday afternoon, I think, maybe even earlier, Raffensperger had said, it wasn't one call, it was at least 2 calls. He called me back at some point later on to harangue me even further, except this time in the second call where he really made his explicit, not explicit request, but he suggested, hey, why don't you try this trick? The old, if there are some signatures that don't match in a county that went heavily for Biden, perhaps you could say, why, the taint extends to all mail-in ballots from that county and just exclude them from the count. Obvious corrupt suggestion there. But apparently Raffensperger had at least 2 staffers on the phone line with him who, I guess, are willing to say they heard Lindsey Graham say this thing. So we have yet to resolve exactly how that's going to work out. Of course, with the Republican majority still holding on in the Senate, not much that can or will actually be done about it, even though I think they, in their hearts, they all know it's wrong, but they love doing it anyway. So they love Lindsey Graham, so they'll keep him around. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. We can see how that develops in the days to come. Anyhow, let's see. Let's go back here to Raffensperger said he declined this offer, and that He later rejected Republican requests to support Trump publicly, he and his staff said in interviews. Raffensperger said he believed that because he was overseeing the election, it would be a conflict of interest for him to take sides. No problem for Catherine Harris. She actually was elected to Congress shortly afterward as a reward for doing this. Around the country, most secretaries of state remain officially neutral in elections. The attacks on his job performance, he says, are clear retaliation. They thought Georgia was a layup shot Republican win. It's not the job of the Secretary of State's office to deliver a win. It's the sole responsibility of the Georgia Republican Party to get out the vote and get its voters to the polls. That is not the job of the Secretary of State's office. That's the way it's supposed to be. It's nice to see it like that. Leading the push for Raffensperger's endorsement was Billy Kirkland. So I guess we'll want to remember the name. He's a senior advisor to the Trump campaign who was a key manager of its Georgia operations. Kirkland burst uninvited into a meeting in Raffensperger's office in late spring that was supposed to be about election procedures and demanded that the Secretary of State endorse Trump, according to Raffensperger and two of his staffers. I don't know if it's the same two who were on the line the other day, but I wouldn't be surprised. If they had witnessed this, they might have said, let me hear this phone call from an out-of-state senator. When reached by phone, Kirkland basically says, no, I'm not talking to you. Directs the request for comment to the Trump campaign. The Trump campaign doesn't respond. The White House and Georgia Republican Party also don't respond. Joe Biden has been projected as the winner of the presidential election in Georgia by a margin of roughly 14,000 votes. The state's now conducting a hand recount at the Trump campaign's request. Raffensperger's office has said that the recount won't swing enough votes to tip the state into Trump's column. As the Georgia results have become increasingly clear, Republicans have unleashed intense criticism of the Secretary of State's office, accusing it, without evidence, of mismanaging the election and allowing Biden to carry the state by fraudulent means. Georgia's U.S. senators, who are standing for election right now, Republicans David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, both of whom failed to win majorities for re-election on November 3rd and face Democratic opponents in January runoffs, called for Raffensperger's resignation. You already know that, but it's still somewhat surprising that they would do so. All of the Republicans representing Georgia in Congress also signed a letter to Raffensperger's office from the personal email account of the Chief of Staff to U.S. Representative Earl Buddy Carter, criticizing the office for a series of supposed irregularities. Doug Collins, who recently lost to Loeffler in the runoff, or the first round, I guess, they didn't have a primary for that seat, has been particularly vocal. On Monday, Collins tweeted, "In a year of political division in Georgia, few things have unified Republicans and Democrats. One of them is Brad Raffensperger's incompetence as Secretary of State." I haven't seen Democrats rally to that, actually. That could be a big lie. Raffensperger has reserved some of his sharpest responses for Collins, calling him a failed candidate and a liar on social media. On Monday, the Washington Post reported that Lindsey Graham, you know the story, called Raffensperger and said that he was calling to see if maybe he would toss out some legally cast ballots to help out. Graham said that he was simply asking how the process works. Two members of Raffensperger's staff who were on the call told ProPublica that the Secretary of State's account was accurate and that they were appalled by Graham's request. By the way, also stored away somewhere in pocket is the news that Graham called other states' officials as well. Apparently, I think yesterday's story was that did Graham say, hey, I was just gathering information about how lots of states do it. In fact, I called the Secretaries of State in Arizona and Nevada as well. The Secretaries of State, apparently, some of them anyway, one of the two, denied that Graham had called them, which was interesting. But Graham didn't back off from the claim that he had made some calls. And so now it's open to question, who did he call? Did he call the Republican governors directly? I think that may have been the case in Nevada, where the Secretary of State is Democratic or was it Arizona, where the Secretary, I don't know, but one of the two states, I'll find the article and share it with you later, but where the Secretary of State is a Democrat, Graham doesn't call him or her to learn about how the process of overseeing the election works. He calls instead the Republican governor, who may or may not have any idea how elections work, brass tacks wise, but would be a more friendly phone call. So that was kind of some interest as well. Let's continue with a little bit more of this article before jumping around to try and find these other examples I mentioned to you. Raffensperger said that the Trump campaign scapegoated him. Its contention that he ineffectively managed the election amounts to hot air and hyperbole, he said. In Georgia, it is not new to see failed candidates claim fraud or suppression. At the end of the day, the Trump campaign's messaging didn't resonate with 50% plus one of the voters. The campaign's formal efforts to gain the Secretary of State's endorsement began on January 10th, when Kirkland emailed Deputy Secretary of State Jordan Fuchs, F-U-C-H-S, I'm hoping I've got that right, assuming that Raffensperger would welcome the opportunity to serve in an unofficial role. We are getting ready to release the campaign's statewide leadership team and wanted to make sure you were good to be listed as an honorary co-chair, he wrote, according to an email obtained by ProPublica. At the direction of Raffensperger, Fuchs declined. It's our standard practice not to endorse any candidate. This policy is not directed at any specific candidate, but all candidates, as the Secretary oversees elections and the implementation of new voting machines here in Georgia, she wrote. Kirkland has a long history in Georgia Republican politics. He's also worked for the Trump White House, first in the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs and then for Vice President Mike Pence. He left the White House in the fall of 2019 to become a Georgia-based senior advisor to the Trump campaign. He also serves as a senior advisor to Pence's leadership PAC. Oh, more on leadership PACs in a moment. FEC filings show that Kirkland is paid for consulting by the Trump campaign and the Republican National Committee. Loeffler hired Kirkland to be her campaign manager in January. It's not unusual for candidates to ask for the endorsement of state elected officials, including secretaries of state, says veteran Republican elections attorney Ben Ginsberg. But usually, campaigns accept the answer when they're given if they don't know how to behave, Ginsberg said. The Trump campaign did not accept Raffensperger's refusal after he announced that his office would mail absentee ballot applications to every registered voter in the state ahead of its June primary, a move opposed by the Trump campaign. The executive director of the Georgia Republican Party, Stuart Bragg, requested a meeting. He told Raffensperger's staff that he wanted to discuss election law and outstanding public records requests for voter data, filed by the party. But then guess what? Kirkland crashed the meeting shortly after it began. A lot of people have noticed you didn't endorse, he said. According to two staffers, Raffensperger again made clear that any endorsements were against office policy. Raffensperger had to leave the meeting early for another event, and when the meeting came to a close, one of his staffers offered to continue the conversations at a later date and asked if there was any additional publicly available voter data that the party needed. Well, we'll see how helpful you are in November, Kirkland said before leaving the office and slamming the door behind him, according to the staffers. Trump has repeatedly and baselessly questioned the Georgia results on Twitter, accusing both the Secretary of State's office and Republican Governor Brian Kemp, a Trump loyalist, who, unlike Raffensperger, did agree to be an honorary campaign co-chair, and nonetheless accused now of coordinating with activist and former Democratic gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams to make Georgia's elections less secure. You saw that accusation the other day, I think, where he tweeted the consent decree, and there's no way he wrote that tweet because he doesn't know what that means, signed by, although he's had consent decrees with the Department of Justice before to end his racist housing practices, so maybe. The consent decree signed by the Georgia Secretary of State, with the approval of the governor, Brian Kemp, and at the urging of Stacey Abrams, makes it impossible to check and match signatures on ballots and envelopes, etc. They knew they were going to cheat, must expose real signatures, Trump tweeted over the weekend. Nothing about that consent decree, of course, which was aimed at addressing the disparity in signature matches among racial groups, prevents clerks from verifying signatures. So, total lie. Raffensperger said his office has repeatedly and publicly explained the process for signature matches, and he laughed at the idea that he would coordinate with Abrams, who has criticized his office over issues such as long lines at the polls in minority neighborhoods in prior elections. I guess that's what Collins thought he was referring to in saying uniting both Democrats and Republicans in criticism of the Secretary of State. They were not united in their criticisms. They were united in the fact that they had criticisms. They were just very different criticisms. And I would venture to say that Republicans dismissed the criticisms offered by Democrats. Well, let's see. Shall we continue with this? There is just a little bit more. So why don't we finish this up and see if there's any more fun nuggets in here. Trump and Republican legislators have pressed their allegations even as the National Republican Senatorial Committee has distributed talking points implicitly acknowledging that Biden won the election. According to an internal memo obtained by ProPublica, that message contrasts with what Trump, his campaign, and his administration are telling supporters. The memo was circulated last week among Georgia field staff who are preparing for 2 runoff elections in January that will determine which party controls the upper chamber. It contains a series of key talking points directed at prospective voters. One says that the Democratic candidates, Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff, quote, are funded by out-of-state liberals because there'll be a rubber stamp for their radical agenda. You get the idea. No need to actually repeat the nonsense that they have. I'm not even sure really what this is doing in the report. The talking points, though, omit any mention of Biden, but none of the outcomes outlined by the NRSC, which did not respond to requests for comment, would be possible with a Republican president. So the idea that there'll be a rubber stamp for the radical agenda, et cetera, all those sorts of accusations. Well, if Trump were really the president, there wouldn't be a radical agenda in their view. And so what's the problem? Except, I don't know, no comment, they say. Raffensperger expressed frustration at the lack of action by Republicans from the White House down to proactively address issues of election integrity. If Trump and Collins were concerned about voter fraud, they would have proposed and passed legislation to fix it. Instead, he said they did nothing, absolutely nothing. And that's well worth noting. That's the end of the article. Now we can dive back into Pocket and see if we can find the other ancillary stories that go along with this. Let's see. We got the Michigan story, which we've covered. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court story we've covered. I've got to thumb through all of these things and figure out where these other observations come from. Yes. Well, here's one that I think probably still has value in adding. David Neer, observing another angle on Georgia in responding to, let's see, the tweet of Justin Gray, an investigative reporter for WSB TV. Where is that? I don't even know. Let's click on it and find out. Metro Atlanta. So reporting on the Georgia results here in a new interview with me, says Justin Gray, Raffensperger says 24,000 Republicans who voted absentee in the primary did not vote at all in the general election. And he says Donald Trump cost himself the election in Georgia by sowing distrust in absentee voting. He would have won by 10,000 votes, Raffensperger is supposing, if he actually ended up suppressing by depressing his own voter base. That's real interesting. There were, I guess, 24,000 people who were willing to vote absentee in the primary for Republicans and who, I guess, apparently, we can only guess as to why they didn't vote at all in the general election. And I guess, they could have died of COVID. There's that possibility. We don't know whether they checked it against the list of deceased voters. But they opted not to vote at all rather than make the choice between going to the polls personally, which could be dangerous because of the spread of coronavirus, or casting a mail-in ballot because the president had spent the last couple months saying how terrible and unreliable that was. So they just threw their hands up and said, forget it. And it's Raffensperger's supposition here that Trump absolutely could have won Georgia if he had just expressed confidence in the mail-in ballot system, these 24,000 other Republicans probably could have been counted on to cast their votes. David observes on top of this, part of this is also Raffensperger's doing. He sent absentee ballot applications to all voters before the primary, but after facing severe attacks from fellow Republicans, this is one set of attacks from fellow Republicans that Raffensperger did give into. He's not steel-spined, and he's not, he's not immune to the criticism. He was criticized for sending out all those absentee ballot applications for the primary, and so opted not to do so for the general election. He did not send absentee ballot applications to everybody registered in the state for the general because he had been so, incorrectly, I think, but cruelly criticized for doing so. And as a result, I guess, who knows whether those people, those 24,000 Republicans who voted in the primary, did they make conscious decisions? Well, I'd rather just not vote than risk coronavirus. And I've heard that mail-in balloting was somehow unsafe, or was it just, are we talking about, and this could easily be the case, talking about elderly voters who, look, a primary election absentee ballot application has shown up in my mailbox. I'll fill that out. That sounds very convenient. And then another one didn't show up. And sometimes when you get talking to seniors about things like this, they may think, I already, no big deal. I already voted. That was back in June. Remember? Yeah, well, see, that was the primary, but now it's the general election. Oh, I didn't realize. And if an application doesn't show up in the mail, they don't fill one out. And they don't go requesting one either because they don't say to do that on, Jeopardy or General Hospital or whatever it is that they spend their time watching on TV. And it can happen that way. So that's a good point, too. David Neer says part of it is Raffensperger's own fault. But why did he opt not to send them? Because of the pressure that he got from Republicans like Trump and the Trump campaign. So they get half of that, too. So 3/4 of the fault falls with Trump and the Trump campaign and other top Republicans. And we'll give about 25% there to Raffensperger. But he seems at ease with the outcome, so no big deal. All right, let's see. There were a couple of other things that... here's the other story from Wall Street Journal was the one who was reporting the news of Graham having called Raffensperger twice, but also, I think, had news about him speaking to other officials in other states. Is that right? Let me see if I can doesn't look like it says it in here. So on the lookout here for notes about Graham calling other states. And I'll have to dig that up for you too. So between me and Scott, I hope we can get you the proof that you need. Or you can just take my word for it. You can always do that. But I like to be able to provide proof. Don't make you ask that question. All right. Several other storylines that we should be following. Just follow up from yesterday, as I mentioned with Greg, the elections starting with the lower rung leadership positions begin today. I think it was yesterday we read in roll call that they had a 12 o'clock hard stop, I guess, on the work for today, which means that they're probably handling that voting right now. By way of predictions, I think the two contested races that were out there that roll call had anything to say about was, let's see, I don't remember what the position was, and maybe we can find that roll call article again just to bring that up. But the contest that they spoke of was for what, like the number 4 spot, whatever they're calling that these days, between Catherine Clark and David, I'm told, Cicilline is how he pronounces the name. So at least we'll go with his pronunciation. It is his name, after all. Right. First contested race is for the number 4 position of assistant speaker. So, fairly impressive sounding position. Well, I did my quick and dirty review of things. It was late last night when I got down to it. So I didn't do the full on review that would take it down to the most granular level. But by the time we do that election will be over. So we'll just say this, and they may be over now. The quick and dirty quick look at how much money did the leadership PACs distribute to federal candidates tells us that Catherine Clark has the edge in that contest. Her Fair Shot PAC, that's the name of her leadership PAC, has apparently distributed something in the neighborhood of $430,000 to, I don't know. Well, let's see. How many? In 2020, she gave to 110 different federal candidates, 112 or so in 2018, 42 in 2016, the first year of operation of her PAC. That versus Cicilline's $352,000 in federal distributions, going back to 2014, though, but still a smaller number of candidates over those years, probably only about 150 in all that time. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. All right, let's see. We left off, we were talking about the Clark-Cicilline leadership race, and I'm looking around to see whether there is any news on it, and I don't know whether we're going to get any, or how quickly it is, or let's see, when the voting is supposed to take place, but I guess fairly soon, if not right now. So just kind of trying to check on this thing. Let's see. 18 minutes ago, we have the report of Heather Cagle from Politico saying nominating speeches for House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer currently happening. Let's see. Dems say they're humming along and could even get to the assistant speaker election, the first contested race on the docket this morning. Just noting the fact that this contest is taking place, no word on results there, so the voting may not have begun yet. But I did note, I will note for you that I took a look at through Google News for some of this stuff, and I mentioned to you that these the elections happen fairly quickly after the leadership elections happen fairly quickly after the actual general elections. But it's not the case that people don't see the opportunities a long time in advance. Just so when I was looking for current results, did we have the vote already? I happened across an article from back in August of this year in The Hill entitled Cicilline Clark Privately Jockeying for Top Leadership Role. So, yes, they know very well what positions are likely to be open or contestable, or who's, positioned to move up and who's not for months in advance. But for questions like why didn't somebody challenge Nancy Pelosi for the speakership given the outcome of the general election? The answer is, well, as you see, for a good reason and by design, these elections take place very quickly afterwards. There's not a lot of time to organize for the race that would require not only the most previous groundwork for in years gone by, but the most careful and exacting preparation in vote counting would be necessary in order to pull something like this off and not damage the rest of your career if you happen to lose. You don't want to put everything at risk to do this. So it's not a casual thing. But I do see a lot of people asking that question. Well, couldn't anybody, if they wanted, why did nobody run for speaker? And the question comes both from seasoned observers and from newcomers. But for the newcomers, it's an easier answer. For seasoned observers, it's a slightly more complex question and more complex answer. But a lot of people wondering, when will any next generation, whether it's already people who've been in the House for 10 years or more, or new members, or when is somebody going to step up and try something like this? Well, I don't know if it's such a great thing that they do, or that it's something you necessarily have to have every time around, but it takes years and years and years of preparation. If you thought for some reason that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was going to run for speaker and make a credible bid at it in what would be her second term in office, it's wishful thinking. It's not necessarily the case that it has to work the way it works, but it currently does work this way. People who cast votes for these positions are looking for experience and demonstrated dedication to getting and keeping Dems elected. And Nancy Pelosi has put that record together. As I mentioned the other day, I'm extraordinarily pleased by Ocasio-Cortez's interest in doing this stuff early. It's a very rare thing that a first-term member will form a leadership PAC and distribute a significant amount of money. There are people here, right, we said in the Clark-Cicilline contest for the fourth-ranking position who've been preparing for this for some time. Cicilline's been aiming at leadership, if you can go by the fact of when he established his leadership PAC, in time to make contributions in the 2014 election cycle. Clark slightly later, beginning in the 2016 election cycle. But both of them have been out there working hard to financially support Democratic candidates for the House for at least 6, and in Cicilline's case, 7 to 8 years. It's not something you just decide, I'm going to go for it today. Anyway, if you wanted to do a more granular analysis, either because you still think you can come up with a different prediction before the vote takes place and we get the results, or whether you want to analyze after the fact, did this formula hold true? Like I said, the quick and dirty, the estimation, $430,000 for Catherine Clark, $352,610 for David Cicilline. And as I said, the numbers of candidates that they gave to is another level of sophistication you look at. 110 candidates, 112, 100, and then 42. So what is that? 222 plus another 42, 264. There's going to be some overlap. Some of those are repeats. But okay, it gives you a quick idea of things. Cicilline giving to 40 or so candidates this cycle, 49 or so in 2018, 20 in 2016, 10 in 2014. Doesn't add up. So on both counts there, I would point to Clark. The next thing you do, if you really want to be sure, is you go through who are those 110 candidates that she supported in 2020? How many of them won? Many of them may have lost their elections or even lost their primary elections. I don't know if you would have enough to close the gap between 110 and 40. I doubt it. But also some of them might be knocked off the list. Perhaps it's possible that among the 40 are people that Cicilline gave to. Maybe some of the same 110 that Catherine Clark gave to. How do they make their decision? Would it really, though, be based on something as simple as, well, Cicilline gave me more money than Clark did? It could be. They may not be that crass about it, but it's a general guideline, and I don't know how many decisions are made that way. I think it's more along the lines of, I remember that I got help from this one or that one, and maybe non-monetary help is factored into it too. But that's how you would check and see whether money, if it's not the driver of how these decisions are made, because that's embarrassing to say, it could be a major influence, that's true, but is it still a good predictor? The other race that they mentioned as contested in the roll call article, Pete Aguilar and Robin Kelly. Oh, I forgot to tell you, by the way, Cicilline's leadership PAC, he's changed the name along the way. It used to be DNC PAC, which I think is kind of confusing because, of course, DNC, most people think of in the context of Democratic politics as Democratic National Committee. And I wonder whether they objected to his calling it the DNC PAC. His initials, of course, are, his full name is David Nicola Cicilline, DNC. Clever, right? Well, I don't know whether they insisted on the change, but now it's called Gun Safety PAC, which is fine and even more descriptive. And at any rate, just thought I'd let you know what those PAC names were if you wanted to look them up. Pete Aguilar, who administers CA, like California, CA-LUV, like California Love PAC, I guess. I don't know whether LUV stands for something else, but whatever. I don't question people usually about the weird names that they give their PACs. Robin Kelly works through her leadership PAC called Visionary PAC. Well, that's very nice. It's very complimentary of herself there. She's got a lot of confidence in what she's doing there. Let's see. What were they running for? The number 6 position of vice chair. Aguilar versus Kelly. Deb Haaland having withdrawn from the race on Sunday. And here the edge goes to Aguilar, having spent $212,000 in this 2020 cycle, an additional $95,800 in 2018 cycle, in 16 another $23,900. Robin Kelly really just getting started on this in 2000. For some reason, only $9,500 in the 2020 cycle, I meant. And in 2018, actually more, some $17,000 spent, but nothing comes close to the $212,000 spent just in 2020 cycle alone by Pete Aguilar. So the edge there in the quick and dirty estimation to him. We'll see whether that happens to be the case and whether it follows those guidelines. I'd predict the races for Catherine Clark for the number 4 slot and Pete Aguilar for the number 6 slot, and we'll see how it works out. Okay, on to other things, some of which might interest you even more than those 2 items. Let's see. Is Pocket not going to let me back? Why not? What's going on here, Pocket? Let's wake up, Pocket. Get with the program here. That would be real trouble. Yeah, looks like my... What? Now I have... This is interesting. Now it's telling me... Looks like my browser is set to block third-party cookies. Please update your privacy settings to accept cookies. Or try logging in again. I have no idea how to quickly do that, although it's willing to guide me through it. I'm just not going to do that now and on the radio. Let's see if it works on my other computer, which has not refreshed itself. Yes, good. Let's move on with those then. Okay, let's see. I think we're good with some of the other stories that we ran through before. Well, how about this story? This was news from Rudy Giuliani's court appearance. You remember yesterday that Joan told us that Rudy Giuliani hadn't been in federal court since 1992. Apparently, by the way, I did find some other information being tweeted around that would indicate that Giuliani has had some other courtroom appearances since 1992, just not in federal court. Where was this one? I think our friend Der Wouter was tweeting this around. Let me see. Giuliani and the court appearances here. Yes, right here. Noting after Zoe Tillman had noted what Joan passed on to us, that according to the PACER federal court database, Giuliani last entered an appearance in federal court in 1992. Wouter pointing out, well, I guess New Hampshire state court and a personal assistant rap doesn't count. What's the story here? I don't know what it was about appearing in New Hampshire state court, but apparently Rudy showed up in Florida court to defend, not federal, but state felony insurance fraud charges against the daughter of one of his personal assistants, and a personal assistant with whom it was widely rumored he had had an affair. Actually, it was alleged by his third wife during their divorce proceedings, apparently, saying that Vanessa Ryan, who was his assistant, was in fact a a lover as well, and her daughter got in trouble for felony insurance fraud, and Rudy Giuliani showed up to defend her in court, and successfully so, by the way, which is too bad because according to the report here from the Daily Mail, which may or may not be reliable on this or any other thing, the felony, the insurance fraud with which she was charged seemed particularly egregious. Want me to give you the bullet point rundown that the Mail offers up here? Rudy Giuliani's assistant, Vanessa Ryan, escaped. Well, maybe I'll give you the headline first. Exclusive. Rudy Giuliani scores huge legal victory, not for Trump, but for his other client, as his lover's daughter is let off the hook for 2 felony insurance fraud charges. They put lovers in scare quotes there. This is a piece from December of 2018. The quick bullet point review of what happened. Giuliani's assistant, Vanessa Ryan. This was, I think, before we were introduced to Christiane Allen. I don't know whether Ryan is still with him in either sense, but not at this point do we hear it. In this case, she's described as his assistant. Well, Vanessa Ryan escaped 2 felony charges of insurance fraud in Broward County, Florida on Monday. Vanessa is the daughter here that we're talking about. Ryan, 34, is the daughter of Giuliani's alleged lover, Maria Ryan. So glad we straightened that out. Vanessa was instead ordered to pay $1,641 in investigative costs. She was accused of fraud. Now get this. After she called to renew her insurance, car insurance, from the scene of a car crash, but failed to tell Progressive, interestingly enough, she chose to enroll with, of the accident. So what she does is her insurance with Progressive has lapsed. She has an accident. She says, oh, crap, I don't have any insurance. So she calls Progressive and says, hi, this is Vanessa Ryan, and I'd like to renew my insurance with you, Progressive. And they said, sure, great. That'll be, whatever, $100. I don't know. I'm in Florida. Could be 50 cents for the insurance. So I know. And so she re-ups the insurance. And then the next day, she waits till the next day and calls and says, I don't know whether she bothers to, comment on the absurdity of it, but says, I've just had an accident. I need your help. And I don't know whether I guess it comes up on the computer at some point. So I don't know how much investigation had to be done, but it comes up, hey, you renewed with us yesterday and you had an accident today. That seems like bad luck. So she's accused of fraud after calling to renew her insurance from the scene of the car crash, doesn't tell them she has an accident. The next day, she files an accident claim, triggering a fraud alert. The computer will do that for you probably by itself. Broward County Attorney Michael Gottlieb said, I don't believe the system showed any favoritism because it involved the president's lawyer. The fact that she got off the hook here. But Giuliani previously said he was representing Ryan to show the court she's just a young woman who made a mistake. There's no other reason that he would have showed up to defend her in court. He just wanted the Florida court in the middle of nowhere, Broward County. It's not the middle of nowhere, but just randomly, I showed up to teach the Broward criminal justice system a lesson. She's just a young woman who's made a mistake and who is the daughter of someone that my third wife says in our divorce proceedings that I was having an affair with, and no comment on that. All right. Well, I thought that was somewhat interesting. So, yeah, he's been in court. Anyway, he was in court again the other day, and he absolutely sucked at it in this case. And so the Los Angeles Times covered it very closely under the headline, As Trump's Election Lawsuits Fizzle, Giuliani Goes to Court. It doesn't get better. And I don't know whether we bother reading the whole thing, although I think the news nuggets of it that I got yesterday via Twitter, there were a lot of people monitoring the case, and apparently they had a call-in line that had like 4,000 slots on it that you could listen to the court proceedings, and it was full, and they had to start a second line. That's how many people were interested in seeing how does Rudy Giuliani hold up in court these days. And the answer is not well. And apparently part of it was like a 10-minute harangue at the outset about unspecified and unsubstantiated claims of nationwide fraud, and everybody knows this, that, and the other thing, and blah, 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 and fact-free And exactly the sort of thing you're not supposed to do in any opening arguments. It wasn't a trial per se, but they were, I guess, just making motions practice. But anyway, just a bunch of unsubstantiated nonsense, and it was pretty obvious to the judge that that's exactly what it was. And he asks him, so where's the, where in all of this pleadings does all this stuff appear? Because I don't see it in the written pleadings. Oh, yeah, it's not in there. Oh, okay. That's not the way these things are supposed to work. And I guess later on, the judge asks, as he frequently will, so like these allegations that you've made, what sort of standard of review do you suggest I give to these, the whole story, the allegations and the defenses to them? And starting with you, Giuliani, and apparently he says, I don't know, the regular one? Which, I mean, maybe you have to have some legal training here, but ordinarily, basically, what the judge is asking here is, are you asking that I should give some sort of strict scrutiny review to this thing? I can only challenge what the state action is here if, there's some, major league national security implication or obvious, some sort of obvious fraud that's gone on here? Or should I be looking for arbitrary and capricious action by state actors? Should I be looking for, would a reasonable person believe that this is a fine way of proceeding? What sort of, I don't know, whatever you got, I guess. I guess he's sort of just forgotten what he was supposed to be doing. And I guess he made light of it at some point during the proceedings too. Let's take a quick look here at what Chris Megarian has put together for the LA Times here. Since Election Day, Rudy Giuliani has been a fire hose of conspiracy theories about why President Trump lost. He peddled disinformation about voting software in Fox News appearances, spread baseless allegations of fraud in the parking lot of the Philadelphia Landscaping Company, right next to the sex shop, of course, and claimed that the media was corrupt in his personal YouTube show, pausing at one point to advertise a cigar store. On Tuesday, Giuliani tried a new venue, federal court in Pennsylvania. Like a lot of people have been wondering about the stupid things he's been spewing and said, would he have the guts to do this in federal court? Because it won't fly. The answer is he doesn't care whether it doesn't fly, I guess. And yes, he will say these things in federal court. Although the former New York City mayor has served as the president's personal lawyer for years, it was his first appearance on Trump's behalf before a judge. It didn't go well. In an episode emblematic of Trump's faltering legal effort to overturn the election result, Giuliani argued without evidence that there was a massive conspiracy behind Joe Biden's victory, even though there were no such allegations in the Trump campaign's actual lawsuit, the paper, right? It's a widespread nationwide voter fraud, Giuliani said. He accused local election officials of being part of a little mafia and preventing Republican Party observers from watching ballots being counted. He said only cities controlled by Democratic machines had problems, and you'd have to be a fool to think this is an accident. But under questioning from U.S. District Judge Matthew Brann, Giuliani admitted this is not a fraud case. Brann did not issue a ruling on Tuesday, but he was openly skeptical of Giuliani's arguments. The case is narrowly focused on whether election officials in Pennsylvania should have given voters an opportunity to fix problems with their mail-in ballots after submitting them. Some counties did, some counties did not. A divergent approach that reflects the nation's tradition of local control of elections, but which the Trump campaign argued was unconstitutional. So we've never elected anybody constitutionally in this country, apparently. The campaign had already dropped a related issue, whether some Republican observers were improperly barred from watching ballots being processed. The lawsuit aims to block Pennsylvania from certifying the state's presidential race results, just like they were trying to do in Georgia. Biden won by roughly 73,000 votes, giving him Pennsylvania's 20 electoral votes and cutting off Trump's path to a second term. Mark Aronchik, a lawyer from the Allegheny County Board of Elections, said Giuliani was in a fantasy world and called his allegations disgraceful. By the way, I guess I did see others observing while the proceedings were going on that, Giuliani ended up admitting, yes, there's no allegations made here about the elections observers being prevented from doing their observing, because that's demonstrably untrue. Now, he says that in his opening statement anyway, and then they press him on it, and he says, yeah, actually, that isn't in here. That's not in the lawsuit. Apparently, Giuliani had a fight with a reporter a couple of days ago, in which the reporter, having read the pleadings that were being submitted in preparation for this proceeding, said, hey, look, the Republicans have dropped their claims about the election observers. Giuliani fought with him publicly and said it wasn't true, and you're a terrible reporter, and you're a liar, et cetera, et cetera. And then it turns out to be true, and Giuliani admits as much once pressed on it. So that was a fun side story, too. Back to this story. Trump, of course, has frequently and falsely described the election as stolen, rigged, fraudulent, fired Chris Krebs, right, the top cybersecurity official at the Department of Homeland Security, for contradicting him. The Pennsylvania hearing was a rare occasion for the president's rhetoric to be scrutinized in the courtroom, where evidence is required and legal standards hold sway. The sort of thing we always hope would be reflected in our general discourse, but is not. Until Giuliani showed up in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, the president's lawyers, multiple, had been far more restrained. During a November 10th court hearing in Pennsylvania, in which they tried to persuade local officials to toss out several hundred ballots, the judge asked one of the president's lawyers whether there was any fraud at issue. I'm asking you a specific question, and I'm looking for a specific answer, the judge said. Are you claiming that there's any fraud in connection with these 592 disputed ballots? You remember the story of the frustrated judges from the other day. No, essentially, says the lawyer, Jonathan Goldstein. Another lawyer in the Trump campaign also faced the same situation in Arizona. With Trump running out of legal options, of course, probably would have been a good idea to send a better attorney than Rudy Giuliani, who to this point has made a big show, by the way, of saying that he was working for Trump for free. Remember that? I guess that, too, has fallen by the wayside. Now he says he wants $20,000 a day to do this nonsense. Did we get a coverage in this piece of the question of the standard of review? No. All right. Well, I'll have to find that those tweets for you too, and share them with you as well, because I think you'll get a good laugh out of them. All right, we're running out of time again. Will this computer let me back into Pocket? Yes, good. So I can scan for stories to tell you about how I regret not bringing to your attention. Yes. And here's one perhaps we'll save for later in the week. That being tomorrow at this point, and I don't know what we're going to do with Friday. We might have to just go with the old rerun on that one. But there are still, once again, too many stories that I feel are important to share with you. So we'll see whether I can squeeze that in during the afternoons of the next day or so. Let's see. Okay. No, I think there's probably nothing else that we'll be able to shoehorn in here in the minute or two that we have left, but I'm seeing if I can scroll back for one or two other things that I thought were important that I might be able to summarize very quickly. No, it's going to take some more organization and review. So, okay, quick preview then of what we have on the table for discussion for tomorrow and any possible Friday show. Some examinations of what lies ahead in terms of whether to look ahead or look backward once again at a criminal Republican regime leaving office as a Democratic administration enters office. Same situation, obviously, that we faced in early 2009 following the 2008 elections. And, a lot of the same team involved in making the decision. Apparently, yesterday, this too much discussed, except here on the show. We've previewed it, but never discussed it. We didn't discuss it this week. At any rate, the question being put to Joe Biden, what are we going to do about, will there be prosecutions possibly or investigations of the Trump administration and Trump wrongdoing under a Biden Department of Justice? And he gives the technically correct answer, which he's given before, which is that the Justice Department will operate independently and without interference from the White House under a Biden administration. And if the evidence takes them there, and it's an absolute necessity that we conduct these investigations, then we will. And if prosecutions are the only natural result, then there will be prosecutions. But he's not enthused for it, and it makes a lot of people worry, including me, and I understand why he's giving the statement he's giving now, and why you can't be giving statements assuring otherwise at this point. It does make me wonder, and it does make me worry, and it's making a lot of people worry and wonder. New York Times, for instance, carrying in the New York Times Magazine section, the work under the headline of, oh goodness, we're going to have to go back to Pocket in order to get to the headline because they've come up with a fancy graphic display. Can America restore the rule of law without prosecuting Trump? A lot of people think that maybe it won't be entirely feasible to do this way. And then, of course, more don't panic messages from others that will say things like the Georgia Gambit can't possibly work. I must say, though, that the reassurances from people that say don't worry about such things, it'll all work itself out in the end, I think are misguided. And I think a lot of people commented on this yesterday. It was the backlash, apparently, that changed the vote in Michigan. And so, don't drop that shaming ability.
From networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Right. In other words, if we all didn't panic and just waited patiently for the process to play out, we don't know that the Michigan board would have changed their decision. Okay. Time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. He's got a lot on his plate as usual, and I have previewed none of it. But that only means it's a surprise for you, so stay tuned.